Hello everyone, and welcome to the 51st episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Freddy Krueger has been haunting the dreams of children and adults alike for nearly 4 decades through an abundance of slasher movie camp and copious amounts of nightmarish gore. There are 9 films in this franchise, and in this video, we'll be covering information that we receive in 7 out of those 9 films. Those being Nightmare on Elm Street 1 through 5, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and Freddy vs. Jason. Unfortunately, as is quite common with slasher film dynasties, a number of these films leave a lot to be desired. Nevertheless, they do form a somewhat cohesive story for Freddy, which is an achievement that a few other series in this genre notably lack. There are, of course, a few continuity issues, but aside from that, we can draw a fairly complete storyline from these films. I'd like to note that I won't be delving into every detail of Freddy's numerous crimes or choice of dialogue, as to do so would be redundant, so keep that in mind as we move forward. We'll start by delving into Freddy's backstory, taking a look at the sickening child murderer he was as a man, before we take a look at the monster he became in death, the brutal, nightmarish invader of dreams that would plague the denizens of Springwood for years after the destruction of his corporeal form. An unwanted and bloodthirsty trespasser in one's own mind is a terrifying concept, and though Freddy's character is partially based on a real-world occurrence, in reality, Freddy can do us no harm. But we're all subject to breaches into our personal lives in many different ways, and one of those ways is financially. However, you can protect yourself from any unwanted incursions into your finances by taking advantage of our sponsor for this video, Privacy. Privacy is an incredibly useful tool that allows you to set up single-use credit cards, giving you the power to more effectively manage your finances online, while also providing protection to your personal information. For example, we've all been in a situation where we want to try out a free trial for one service or another, but a lot of those trials have the great stipulation of requiring you to give them a credit card before you can begin trying out their service, and after the trial period has concluded, they charge you for a subscription to their service, whether you want it or not. If you're like me, chances are you've forgotten to cancel one of these trials and were charged a nice chunk of change due to your lapse in memory. With Privacy, you'll never have to go through that again, as you can set a limit on any card you create, and if anyone tries to charge that card for more than the limit you set, it will automatically be declined, thus saving you the headache of an unwanted purchase. You can also set up merchant cards to manage your subscriptions, setting those same limits to ensure you're never accidentally or purposefully charged past the amount you've chosen to give these services monthly, all while providing you with anonymity that makes credit card fraud a thing of the past. You can try these services out for yourself right now by going to privacy.com/vile and signing up for an account. And as an added bonus, you'll receive $5 free for a limited time to spend however you like. So don't wait. Secure your finances by going to privacy.com to set up an account and start using your free cash today. Again, that's privacy.com/vile to earn some free cash and peace of mind today. Thank you, Privacy, for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Frederick Charles Krueger was born in the month of September in the year 1942 to Amanda Krueger and an unknown father. His mother was a nun who cared for the inmates at the Weston Hills Mental Hospital, and over a Christmas holiday in 1941, she was accidentally locked into the asylum in a section where they housed the most brutal and murderous inmates that had been confined to this facility. Amanda was then raped countless times by these criminals. Due to this occurrence, Freddy would come to be known as the son of 100 maniacs, a fact that is considered to be the reason that Freddy, unlike many villains, was born evil. Whether that's truly the case or not, Freddy did end up developing antisocial personality disorder, and we're shown that he displayed at least one of the behaviors associated with this disorder from a young age, that being the killing of small animals. Freddy was also likely a social outcast as a child, as we see in the same scene that he was ridiculed by his fellow classmates for being the son of 100 maniacs, a fact that I'm sure contributed to his desire to harm his classmates in one way or another. To make matters worse, Freddy was adopted by an abusive alcoholic, Mr. Underwood, and I'm sure the terrible treatment he received at home contributed to his violent behavior. These facets of Freddy's life undoubtedly helped him in developing this disorder, and not only that, but over time, the violence inflicted upon him, coupled with his own violent behavior, led to Freddy developing masochism. And in his teenage years, we see that Freddy had become immune to his father's punishments and began to derive pleasure from cutting himself with a straight razor. a compulsion which would follow him well into adulthood and the afterlife. In that same scene, we see where Freddy finally snapped and committed his first murder, returning all of the pain his adopted father had inflicted upon him by ending his life. Though Freddy had plenty of disadvantages when it came to his early development, at some point, he met a woman, Loretta, and fell in love, marrying her and fathering a daughter, Catherine. And against all odds, he began to live a normal life, working a job at the local power plant to provide for his family. Though it seemed he legitimately tried to lead a healthy life, this was only a facade, as Freddy spent his free time capturing children and taking them to the boiler room beneath his workplace, where he would murder them in a variety of gruesome fashions. During his time spent as the Springwood Slasher, Freddy murdered a total of 20 children, as well as his wife, before he was captured and put on trial for his crimes. A trial that would be thrown out on a technicality. A terrible example of the justice system failing. Now, aside from the murder of his wife, Freddy committed every murder we've discussed so far for one reason only: revenge. And Freddy was a highly damaged man who sought to take revenge against his adopted father for abusing him, and revenge against his former classmates for mistreating him when he was a child. The cruelty of Freddy Krueger is highlighted in these murders, as rather than taking revenge on these people personally, he does so indirectly by killing their children, thereby providing them with a level of ongoing suffering in the form of grief and emotional torment, which I'm sure Freddy found much more satisfying than the quickness of death. Thus, with their own revenge in mind, the citizens of Springwood took matters into their own hands and murdered Freddy by setting him on fire in his den of evil. An act which is pretty justifiable, considering that he may have gotten away with his murders had they not done so. However, as is beautifully revealed through 3D segments in Final Nightmare, Freddy made a pact with dream demons that would see him serving as an agent of their desire to blur the lines between the dream world and reality, rendering Freddy an immortal haunt of the nightmares of the children of Springwood. Though this might be true, we can also peg Freddy's undying wish for revenge against those who have wronged him as one of the core reasons why his spirit manifests as a revenant after his demise, as now, Freddy's revenge has been turned towards the children of those who burned him alive. In later films, this revenge is put aside somewhat, as it would seem that once his revenge has been satisfied, he still retains the undying wish to simply kill, which could also be another component of his power. Even though Freddy derives his status as an immortal being from the powers granted to him by demons and his own desire for revenge, he also gains power through the souls of others, becoming stronger with each kill, absorbing the souls of the slain into his body, an ability that's crucial in rebuilding his power after he's dealt with in the first film. After his demise, the appearance of the once average-looking Freddy changes dramatically, donning a faded brown hat, a tattered red and green sweater, and his favored tool of torture. Freddy has taken his injuries into the afterlife, becoming a mess of scars and burnt flesh that add a visceral note to his already intimidating presence. Prior to his transformation, in tandem with his appearance, Freddy displayed an average enough personality. But when he was indulging in his murderous endeavors, his cruelty and sadism manifested in abundance. And now, after his death, he's living as that brutal sadist full-time, often showing us that he has an incredibly sick sense of humor, toying with his victims before granting them their deaths. As I said, his masochism seems to have carried over as well, as though at one point he remarks how being mortal hurts. He likely still feels some degree of pain after his death, and we see him mutilating himself several times to instill fear into his victims, which I'm sure brings him a certain amount of psychological, if not physical, pleasure. Before his death, Freddy was limited in his capacity to inflict pain on others by the confines of his mortal coil, causing suffering through the use of many horrid implements of torture and other physical means. Now that he's transcended into the realm of dreams, Freddy can cause havoc in any way that he can think of. And throughout all of these films, we see Freddy preying on his victims in dozens of imaginative ways, many of which typically consist of preying upon certain facets of a person's life, like their desires, personality, and fears. In this dream world, Freddy is nigh immortal, and though he can be stopped momentarily by his victims when they're in his domain, he will always regenerate and continue to pursue them until they either wake up or die. However, Freddy does have his weaknesses, namely that he needs a vessel from which he can project himself into the dreams of others, and he can also be stopped through an absence of fear of him, or if nobody remembers him, which renders his ability to infect the dreams of others obsolete. When taking on the souls of others, viewing his own reflection, and thus the reflection of those he's absorbed, reflects their pain back onto himself. He can also be pulled from the dream world, and when taken into reality, he is given a mostly mortal form, one that can still endure a significant amount of damage, but one that can be killed nonetheless. However, unfortunately for the populace of Springwood, Freddy never truly stays dead, and even after the events of Freddy vs. Jason, we find that Freddy is likely still alive and well, just waiting for the opportunity to return and bring torment to his children. So with that in mind, who was and is Freddy Krueger? He was a child born of a horrific act of gang rape, one who grew up with that reality hanging over his head, forcing him into a position of constant ridicule. Once born into this world, he was forced into a home with an abusive and alcoholic father who tormented him for the majority of his young life, doling out abuse that caused Freddy to develop violent behaviors of his own, behavior he projected upon others and himself. After murdering the man who brought him so much pain in his youth, Freddy would seemingly use this moment to sever his past, moving on to start a family of his own, and living an average life as a working man in the small town of Springwood. However, this wasn't meant to be, as Freddy could never truly shed the traumas he experienced, and rather than dealing with them in any healthy way whatsoever, he turned to rage and then revenge, doling out punishment and abuse on the innocent in order to spite the guilty. Caught by his wife before murdering her, Freddy was eventually apprehended by the authorities after committing at least 22 murders during his time on the mortal plane. 22 murders that he never answered for in a legal sense due to a technicality. Murdered by the parents of his victims, Freddy would make a deal with demons and transcend into the ethereal world, becoming a living nightmare that sought to achieve the same goal he had lived for during his life: revenge. In his pursuit of this revenge, Freddy would murder 34 people through various gruesome and horrific dreamscapes, marking these people's last moments as nothing short of a terror-filled nightmare. Cruel, sadistic, pedophilic, and brutal to the core, Freddy Krueger in life was a sick, spiteful, and abhorrent person, the lowest of the low, who turned his own traumas onto the innocent in order to satisfy his own twisted desires. In death, Freddy was every bit a monster, one whose malicious intent transcended the confines of mortality to manifest itself as nightmares incarnate, a wraith sent from the depths of hell to torture the souls of his enemies in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Though his character has suffered through an onslaught of camp and poor storytelling, Freddy Krueger, without a doubt, rises above it all and cements himself as one of the most iconic and terrifying slasher villains to ever appear in cinema. And he is without a doubt a vile beast, one that embodies the most revolting and macabre aspects of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Freddy? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured in a future episode while you're at it. If you liked this video and want to see more like it appearing in your feed, click the subscribe button to keep up on the latest episodes, and feel free to leave a like while you're at it. Thank you once again to all of my existing subscribers for your continued and incredible support. If you'd like to support the channel even further, consider signing up as a patron over on Patreon. You can find a link to Patreon down in the description. Thank you to everyone who signed up so far, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed in the description for occasional updates on the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.